Hi, I'm Don from DonDronesOn. Almost 2 years ago to the day, in June of 2022, the Canadian aviation radio Fiasco began. Let's see where we stand. Fiasco. Well, there's a fighting word. Fiasco is defined as a thing that is a complete failure, especially in a ludicrous or humiliating way. Am I being harsh here? I don't think so. This situation is certainly a failure, nothing's happened, and depending upon your point of view, is either ludicrous or humiliating. Take your pick. So let me explain the issue and the current status. Back in 2022, Transport Canada and NAV Canada's default procedure for drone operators flying in the vicinity of airports included a step to transmit a, quote, blind call on the airport frequency to alert manned aircraft of the presence of a drone operation. This was published in the AIM, as shown here. Since then, that procedure has actually been changed from transmit to simply maintaining a listening watch on the applicable frequency. And that's because transmitting is the problem. So in June of 2022, I exchanged a series of emails with one of my followers, Ken, who had dutifully read the AIM and gone out and spent about $300 on an aviation band transceiver. He passed his Rock A certification and then stepped square into a pile of poop. So individual aviation band transceivers must be licensed by ISED, formerly known as Industry Canada. There is an exemption for aviation radios on board aircraft, but the exemption makes it absolutely clear that any radio on the ground, not actually on board an aircraft, requires a license. And that license includes an assigned station call sign. So Ken, again, reading this, happily applied for a license for his radio. And, well, long story short, was bluntly refused his license by ISED. In the ISED email, it states the reason as, due to the broad nature of the request for authority to communicate using the aeronautical band via a wide area ground-based mobile radio. Given this apparent catch-22 between what the TC AIM document stated and ISED's refusal to grant licenses to drone pilots, I immediately alerted the RPAS team at Transport Canada of the dilemma. They happily agreed to look into the issue and attempt to resolve it, noting quite clearly that radio licenses were the domain of ISED, not Transport Canada. They quickly identified the right people at ISED to talk to, and after a reasonable amount of time, a series of meetings took place. As I understand it, representatives from NAV Canada were involved in at least some of these meetings as well. This was all still way back in 2022. The RPAS position taken by Transport Canada was that there were several legitimate situations where it is appropriate for drone pilots to use the aviation radio band to announce the presence of a drone operation. The first one was the scenario offered in the AIM at the time. If you were planning to fly your drone in the vicinity of an airport, but have been unable to contact the aerodrome operator. The idea here was that the drone pilot could initiate what's called a blind radio call on the applicable aerodrome frequency, alerting manned aircraft in the area that a drone operation was taking place. Assuming that it was done appropriately, this would be a very good way to increase situational awareness for any manned aircraft in the area. Improve safety. Simple. A second legitimate case would be a BVLOS operation under an SFOC, or under standard regulations coming up in 2025. Since the drone operator may not be able to detect and avoid manned aircraft when the drone is, well, way beyond visual line of sight, a quick announcement on the right aviation frequency would increase situational awareness for aircraft in the vicinity. Again, improved safety. And there's a third case. It's a bit of a corner case, but certainly legit. There are some temporary flight restrictions raised by NOTAMs that actually require authorization to fly be requested by, you guessed it, radio. So without transmitting on an aviation radio, there would be no way to secure authorization. And finally, perhaps the most obvious case, emergencies. If you've lost control of your drone and you think it's going to interfere with manned aircraft, an appropriately worded call transmitted on an airband radio may save the day. Now, I cannot imagine you would be charged under this sort of emergency circumstance, but without a base station license, theoretically at least, you could be fined. So there are legitimate cases where transmitting on airband radio is an important safety procedure. And to be clear, no one is recommending that drone pilots just willy-nilly start transmitting their flight operations, just in fairly limited but important cases. So what's ISED's problem? Why don't they grant base station licenses when they are properly requested? Well, it took a while for the reasons to come out, but when they did, they basically fell into two categories. The first was a concern that potentially tens of thousands of inexperienced drone pilots could saturate the airwaves with gibberish, thus affecting critical manned aviation communications. Now, that does sound scary for sure, but is it realistic? Handheld transceivers are fairly expensive, a few $100s, so not everyone's running out and getting one, and there's absolutely nothing stopping people from buying them in stores or online today. And yet, drone pilots are not jamming up communications. Surprise. And by the way, this kind of concern also exists with inexperienced manned aircraft pilots, and it happens from time to time. But when someone starts babbling or using the radio inappropriately, they're quickly brought under control by tower personnel or other pilots. So I don't think this concern about drone pilots is realistic. ISED's second reason for saying no was a more classic government bureaucracy issue. They had no procedure in place for dealing with drone pilots. Up until now, base station licenses were being approved for very limited situations. Ground operations around airports was one, and first responders was another example. In both cases, the geographical boundaries were fairly limited. Only a handful of radio frequencies were typically involved in each case, and the users were known entities, like an airport, the police, or perhaps search and rescue. But drone pilots, well, we're a totally different beast. We can move around, potentially anywhere in the country, operate on any frequency that's applicable to that area, and for the most part, we are not known to the aviation community. So ISED had no standard procedure in place to deal with these random drone pilots and how to keep them somehow under control. And on top of that, there was the issue of how to assign ground station call signs. Not an insurmountable issue, obviously, but again, ISED didn't have a procedure for it, and apparently still doesn't, despite some very obvious suggestions. Okay, so maybe not as simple a problem as we might hope, but surely with the problem and the issues defined and the right people talking, a solution could be hammered out. This is not rocket science. After a full year of discussions and meetings, in October of 2023, Transport Canada cheerfully told DPAC that progress had been made and that ISED agreed to take baby steps, as they termed it. What this meant was to select a few drone pilots and grant them base station licenses. Then see how it went. What problems cropped up? What things needed better clarification, maybe in the application process, for example. Now, as it happens, Steve Bannister on the DPAC steering committee was selected as a candidate for these baby step trial runs. He was a perfect candidate, both a seasoned and respected drone pilot and a manned aircraft pilot with over 50 years of experience. And of course, totally familiar with aviation radio use. Steve also regularly had SFOCs for BVLOS flights that he made in the Interlake region of Manitoba, monitoring spring thaw conditions. And his SFOC approvals from Transport Canada always said he needed to ensure, quote, there is sufficient communication equipment for the pilot to contact other airspace users to ensure aviation safety. And of course, aviation radio band was clearly the only practical way to do this between him on the ground and aircraft in the air. Well, there's been a long stream of emails between Steve and ISED staff, clarifying his requirements, answering questions, and well, just going around in circles. So ISED cannot seem to be able to handle even this baby steps approach, which frankly sounds logical and low risk. It's a good path forward. I'm a pretty patient guy when it comes to government. I know things can take time, especially when departmental boundaries are crossed, like in this case. And I hate to bash these guys, but this is ridiculous. I'm told there's yet another meeting this week, but I'm not holding my breath for any progress. So, as of now, June 2024, a full 2 years since the original question was raised, there is no resolution. Not even a trial involving a seasoned professional. I know that Transport Canada and possibly also NAV Canada has made it crystal clear to ISED that aviation safety would be improved if drone pilots under certain circumstances were permitted to use handheld aviation transceivers. ISED, on the other hand, appears to be unable to manage even a trial solution to allow this. Absolutely ludicrous.